Cathay Pacific didn't just suffer during COVID-19. It was trapped, outmaneuvered by its own home government's policies, and forced to burn through over $5 billion in cash with almost no path to survival on its own terms. On June 15, 2020, Cathay Pacific carried 582 passengers. On a normal day, it carried about 100,000, a 99.4% collapse for one of Asia's premier airlines. But this isn't simply a pandemic story. It's a cautionary tale about how political decisions can turn a global airline into a cornered animal. So how did one of the world's most important airlines end up in a financial cage of its own government's making? And can it ever truly escape? For decades, Cathay Pacific wasn't just Hong Kong's airline. It was one of the world's premier long-haul carriers. Its strategy was simple and powerful. Almost everything ran through one hub, Hong Kong, if you were flying between Asia and Europe or Asia and North America. Hong Kong was one of the key places you'd connect. The city marketed itself as the gateway to China, and Cathay was the flag on that gateway. But that single hub model had a hidden weakness. If Hong Kong stopped, Cathay stopped. There was no major secondary hub, no backup base. The airline's global reach lived and died with that one city. Then March 2020 hit and everything changed. As COVID-19 spread, borders snapped shut and air travel demand collapsed worldwide. But what happened to Cathay wasn't just bad, it was extreme. On June 15, 2020, Cathay Pacific carried 582 passengers. On a normal day before the crisis, the figure was around 100,000. That's a 99.4% drop in passenger volume. More than 150 of Cathay's aircrafts, many of them long-haul Boeing 777s and Airbus A350s, were grounded. They weren't earning a cent, but they were still incurring parking fees, maintenance checks, crew training costs, and insurance. Every parked jet was a giant metal asset slowly draining cash. Other global hubs like Singapore, Doha, and Dubai were hit hard too, but their governments quickly began working on ways to keep at least some transit traffic moving and to reopen sooner. Hong Kong went in the opposite direction. Hong Kong chose one of the strictest zero-COVID strategies in the world, and crucially, it kept those rules long after rival hubs had started to move on. For travelers and airlines, these weren't just inconvenient policies, they were business model killers. Inbound passengers faced quarantine requirements of up to 21 days in designated hotels, at times when Singapore might be using one-week quarantines or shifting towards testing-based regimes. Transit passengers from many countries were effectively banned. If your journey involved simply connecting through Hong Kong, you often couldn't go. For a hub-and-spoke airline, that's like switching off the fuel. On top of that came complex rules for aircrew, including closed-loop systems and long isolation periods if any positive cases were detected. That made it incredibly difficult and expensive to schedule long-haul operations reliably. From an aviation economics perspective, this is disastrous. Long-haul flights only make sense when you can fill a large portion of seats, especially the premium cabins, at decent fares. When you're forbidding most passengers from connecting and making operations unpredictable with crew rules, the entire long-haul business case falls apart. Cathay's once dense global network turned into a handful of thin, sporadic routes. The rest of its world-spanning corridors effectively disappeared, and yet the airline still had to pay to keep those planes and people in a state where flying could eventually resume. Those operational decisions quickly showed up in the financials. In 2020 alone, Cathay Pacific reported a loss of about $2.8 billion. Almost its entire income stream vanished in the space of months. At that scale, no private business can survive for long without external help. So the Hong Kong government stepped in with a rescue package, $5 billion, in loans, preference shares, and a direct equity stake. On paper, this was a lifeline. In reality, it came with invisible chains. The package gave the government significant influence over Cathay's future. The state became not just regulator and policymaker, but also part owner and creditor. Cathay was saved from immediate collapse, but its independence was diluted, while governments in Singapore and Qatar were bending over backwards to keep their airlines flying safely and to preserve hub status. Hong Kong's policies treated Cathay almost like a public health sacrifice, an acceptable casualty of a zero-COVID stance. Cathay was rescued, but leashed. To keep that lifeline from snapping, Cathay had to amputate parts of itself. One of the biggest casualties was Cathay Dragon, the group's regional airline focused on short and medium-haul routes across Asia. It played a key feeder role, bringing passengers from secondary cities into Hong Kong to connect onto Cathay's long-haul flights. Cathay Dragon was shut down entirely in 2020. Over 5,900 jobs across the group were eliminated. Entire layers of regional connectivity that once helped support the long-haul network were cut away. Morale collapsed. Pilots and cabin crew with decades of service ended up on unpaid leave, temporary contracts, or redundancy lists. Engineers and ground staff watched the machines they'd built their careers on go silent. And it wasn't just Cathay. A hub airport is an ecosystem. Catering companies, ground handlers, duty-free shops, hotels all felt the shockwaves of Hong Kong's chosen strategy. Here's the part many people outside aviation miss. Global travel demand doesn't simply vanish. It reroutes. As Hong Kong clung to some of the world's strictest travel rules, its competitors smelled opportunity. Singapore's Changi Airport, Doha's Hamad International, and Dubai International moved faster to reopen as testing, vaccines, and new health protocols became available. Their home carriers, Singapore Airlines, Qatar Airways, Emirates, ramped up long-haul capacity and captured displaced demand. Frequent flyers started rebuilding status and miles with other airlines because those were the carriers still offering reliable, quarantine-free connections. Every time a company rewrote its internal travel policy, Cathay lost not just a single passenger, but potentially years of future premium revenue. By the end of 2022, many rival hubs were operating close to or even above their pre-pandemic long-haul capacity in key markets. Hong Kong, tightly bound to its own rules, was still struggling to restore even half of Cathay's 2019 network. That's more than a temporary revenue dip. It's a loss of strategic relevance in the global aviation system. So, how did Cathay end up in this position? On paper, Hong Kong's government had two roles: defend public health and support critical industries, including its flag carrier and its status as an international aviation hub. In practice, during the pandemic, the public health narrative dominated, backed by a political commitment to align closely with mainland China's zero-COVID stance. That meant restrictions stayed in place long after other financial centres had started reopening. Other hub governments tried to balance both sides. They rolled out testing regimes, vaccine requirements, and shorter targeted quarantines in order to protect health while keeping their hubs usable. Hong Kong's approach was blunter. Strict, long quarantines, broad transit bans, highly disruptive rules for aircrew. These decisions may have made sense within a narrow health policy framework, but in aviation terms they amounted to self-imposed isolation. Cathay became collateral damage, and in some ways, a symbol. Its grounded planes and empty terminals reinforced the seriousness of the government's zero-COVID message, even as that same policy eroded the airline's business. And because the government had become a major financial backer of Cathay, the airline's ability to push back or seek radical alternatives was limited. You don't openly challenge the policies of the same authority that now holds your lifeline. Cathay wasn't just trapped by the pandemic, it was trapped by the politics around it. Eventually, the walls started to come down. From late 2022 into 2023, Hong Kong rolled back quarantine requirements, loosened transit rules, and began to welcome back more international traffic. Cathay ramped up operations, reactivated aircrafts, and rehired staff. On the surface, it looked like a comeback story. Planes back in the sky, routes reopening, load factors improving. But underneath, the damage was far more complicated. Business travel, the lifeblood of airlines like Cathay, was slow to return. Many multinational companies had already reoriented their Asian operations through Singapore, Dubai, or other hubs. Once those contracts, habits and relationships settle somewhere else. They don't automatically snap back when Hong Kong reopens. Cathay also emerged from the crisis carrying more debt, and with the government embedded in its capital structure. Servicing that debt eats into future profits. Fleet renewal decisions become more constrained. Aircraft that might have been replaced with newer, more efficient models may have to stay in service longer simply because the money isn't there. Inside the company, years of uncertainty, layoffs, and constant schedule changes took a toll on culture. Skilled people, pilots, engineers, cabin crew, moved to other airlines, or left the industry entirely. Rebuilding that experience base is expensive and slow. Recovery in aviation isn't just about putting planes back in the air, it's about regaining your position in the minds of passengers, corporations, and partners. And that's where Cathay's real challenge begins. The most serious wounds Cathay carries today aren't all visible in a single quarterly report. Corporate travel managers have rewritten their default routings. An executive who now flies New York to Singapore via Changi 3 times a year is earning status with Singapore Airlines, not Cathay. A consulting firm that once connected through Hong Kong to reach clients across Asia might now be locked into deals via Doha or Dubai. Cargo customers have shifted volumes onto other airlines and routings. Those new patterns become entrenched, supported by contracts, loyalty schemes, and operational familiarity. All of this erodes Cathay's future pricing power. Even if planes are full again, it may be with more price-sensitive leisure traffic and less high-yield corporate demand. That makes it harder to pay down debt, invest in fleet renewal, or withstand the next shock. And looming over all of it is the political reality. The Hong Kong government is now deeply tied to Cathay's fate, financially and symbolically. In any future crisis, health-related, political, or economic, Cathay is once again exposed to decisions made for reasons far beyond what makes sense for an airline. Cathay Pacific didn't just survive a pandemic. It became a case study in how a government can accidentally cage its own airline, and how those scars can last far longer than the virus that caused them. For every flag carrier that depends on a single powerful hub and a single political system, Cathay's story is a warning. In global aviation, the biggest risk isn't always your competitors, your customers, or even your balance sheet. Sometimes the riskiest part of your business is the government that owns your runway. These aren't temporary blips, they are enduring shifts. In aviation, reputation and network reliability are core currencies. When an airline is seen as unpredictable or limited by external policies, it loses that currency. And no bailout, even a multi-billion-dollar one, can buy back trust. Airlines operate in political, economic, and regulatory environments far more complex than the aircraft they fly. Even the best-run airline can falter if its ecosystem turns hostile. Cathay's story isn't about poor management. It's about how intertwined government policy and airline operations can be, especially when there's a single dominant hub with restrictive policies. This is a lesson for governments too. Protecting public health and supporting vital industries like aviation must be done in a way that balances risk with connectivity. When you sever that balance, you don't just ground airplanes, you ground cities, economies, and strategic global relationships. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoy aviation documentaries and breakdowns of airline strategy, subscribe to Planes Inside for more in-depth stories from inside the industry.